Generally speaking, when someone lacks emotional maturity, it means that they lack an awareness of their own emotions, they lack an awareness of other people's emotions, and they struggle to take responsibility for themselves or how they are impacting somebody else. In my last talk, I shared with you signs that someone is emotionally immature, and you can watch that one now or after this one. But today we are going to talk about things that emotionally immature people often say. Now, again, knowing that someone's emotional immaturity is not because they are trying to be difficult or selfish or unaware or rude or oblivious. It is more often than not because they never learned how to build emotional maturity. Either because they never learned those skills from their own parents or at home or through the social influences that they had, or because they went through something traumatic, like emotional neglect, like some kind of abuse, like some kind of psychological things happening at home that prevented them from developing those skills. And if they didn't learn it then and didn't take it upon themselves to learn it now, then they wouldn't have it. So understanding about someone else's emotional immaturity or even our own emotional maturity is not about blaming or finger pointing. It's about bringing awareness so that we can handle ourselves with others who are acting in emotionally immature ways, in mature ways ourselves, and also for ourselves as some of these things connect with you so that we can build awareness for ourselves so that we can work on building our own emotional maturity. Yeah? So let's get into this in just a minute here. But first, if you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below. If you are back again, it is always good to have you here. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, the button's about right down there. If you could like the video, if you get something out of it, that would be amazing. Either way, my name is Kristina. I'm a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and a speaker, and the creator of my membership community, the Shift Society, that you can get more information about in the description below. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And if you have a partner or a close friend or a family member who is acting in these emotionally immature ways, saying these emotionally immature things, it can be very difficult. It can be frustrating. It can be hard to feel like you have an honest, authentic, close, and safe relationship with someone when you feel like you are always walking on eggshells around them, like you're afraid to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and that's going to set them off or get some kind of reaction out of them. That can make it really difficult. But once we are more aware that a lot of these things that they are saying or doing or ways that they are reacting to us is because they haven't developed their emotional maturity, then like I said, it makes it a lot easier for us to not get so pulled into it, to not get so affected by it, to not get so put off, hurt, wounded, or angry about it. And it helps us to learn how to then respond in our own more emotionally mature ways. So let's get into the specifics. Let's look at these things that emotionally immature people often say. The first one, it's not my fault. If you are in a conversation with someone bringing up something that upset you, that you found difficult, that you didn't like that they did, and their immediate response is, it's not my fault. Now, this is a very obvious avoidance of any kind of responsibility. Now, fair enough if someone does or says something that they weren't intending to be hurtful, but a response of, it's not my fault, is not going to be helpful. Being able to say something like, oh, that wasn't my intention. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out how we can avoid something like this in the future. Or what was it about that you found upsetting? Let's have a conversation. Or just, I'm really sorry, that wasn't my intention. That would be a more responsible thing to say, a more emotionally intelligent thing to say. Now, knowing that people who avoid taking any kind of responsibility for anything often struggle with a lot of shame. And so there is this big deflection from responsibility because they can feel like if I admit to doing something wrong or bad or hurtful or making a mistake, then it means that I am a terrible human being. I am a mistake. I can't do anything right. And that is very, very hard on a sense of self that is already struggling with a lot of shame. And so there's going to be a very concerted, albeit unconscious effort to avoid that, to push that shame away by not being able or willing to take any responsibility. Which then leads us to the next one, which is seemingly the opposite end of the spectrum, but is actually basically the same thing as saying it's not my fault. And that is when someone says it's all my fault. That, again, is an avoidance of responsibility that shows a lack of emotional maturity. When someone turns themselves almost into this martyr, when you bring something to them and say, this upset me, or I didn't like this, or I didn't like the results that you got from this, or the work you did on this, and they say something like, oh my gosh, it's all my fault. I'm such a terrible person. I can't do anything right. What's wrong with me? It shuts down the conversation and it makes it so that you almost feel bad for bringing it up in the first place and nothing actually gets dealt with or resolved. And maybe you end up apologizing to them for the concern or complaint that you brought in the first place. Number 3 is when someone says something like, they made me do it, or they told me to do it. This is something that children often say. I know my children often say that. Well, I wouldn't have hit her if she wouldn't have done this. Well, I wouldn't have done this if he wouldn't have said this. And they go back and forth like this and nobody's willing to take any responsibility. Everyone is deflecting blame. And now for children, fair enough. It's understandable. They are children. They don't have those emotional maturity skills yet. And it's our job as grown-ups and parents to teach them that and to help them take responsibility for their choices and understand that their brain is in charge of their choices, not somebody else's. But interesting how as adults, if we never learned that, then we can still fall into this pattern of saying, it's not my fault, or I wouldn't have done this if they hadn't done this, or I wouldn't have said this if they wouldn't have done this first, instead of that recognition that even especially as adults, our brains are responsible for our choices, no one else's. Another thing that people who lack emotional maturity often say is, if you don't do this, then I'm not going to do this. It's almost like using blackmail or threats instead of honest communication of feelings, of desires, of wants, of needs, of preferences. And again, if someone grew up with that lack of teaching about emotional maturity, about a lack of modeling of how to identify your thoughts or your feelings or your needs and being able to communicate those in healthy, helpful, or productive ways, then doing that is going to feel unsafe for them. It's going to feel vulnerable for them to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be authentic. So they're going to turn to things like threats in order to get their needs met. And so if you are on the receiving end of that, instead of getting reactive or defensive, being able to see it for what it is and then be able to communicate honestly and openly through that, setting more of a safety net for that honest communication for them, and hopefully they will respond in kind, but also knowing that not always. Some people really feel threatened by honest or open communication because they either weren't taught that when they were growing up, or they were punished in some way for that. If they ever expressed their thoughts or feelings or needs in an honest way, and that was met with criticism, with contempt, with removal of love, with punishment, then that is going to be stuck in their brains and they're going to experience that as adults in their relationship now. And now number 5, the next sign that someone lacks emotional maturity is when they say something like, "I'm fine. What's your problem?" When clearly things are not fine. This would also be labeled as gaslighting. So gaslighting is when something is happening and you call it out or you address it or you question it, and then the other person completely denies it. Different than if it's an honest mistake. Someone says something, you take it a certain way, they weren't meaning it that way, they say, "I wasn't meaning it that way," and you work it out. Usually they're willing to be like, "You know what, I wasn't meaning it that way. This is what I meant." And you can kind of tell when someone is being genuine about that versus them saying something like, "Well, what are you thinking? Like, what's your problem? Why are you being so sensitive? Why are you getting so worked up?" There's this almost accusatory or defensive stance that they're taking that is an avoidance of a more vulnerable or honest conversation because they lack that emotional maturity in order to really identify what they are feeling and to be able to talk about that in a mature and responsible way. But it can be really hard if you're on the receiving end of it and someone is not willing to have those conversations and almost even turn it on you to make you think that you are crazy or that you are the one who is emotionally immature by overreacting to this thing. Number 6, the next sign that someone lacks emotional maturity is if they say something in the face of disagreement, of discord or conflict, like, "I'm not talking to you anymore." Or they just simply shut down, give the silent treatment, and will not address it or talk about it or work it out. Different than if someone says, "I'm feeling really keyed up right now," or "I'm feeling really upset right now. I need to take a break and we can come back to this." Or something like, "I just need some air. I'm finding this conversation really difficult," right? And they let you know that they are feeling too emotionally activated to have an effective conversation, that they know that they're going to say something or do something that they regret. That is actually a sign of emotional maturity when someone can identify how they are feeling in the moment and know that they are not going to be able to talk about something or work something out in an effective way because they are too angry, worked up, keyed up, or upset. But when someone just shuts down, shuts you out, and is unwilling to talk about something or work it out ever, that is a sign that they don't know what to do with their emotions because they've never developed that emotional maturity. And our next thing that you will often hear someone say when they lack that emotional maturity is, "You're just too sensitive." If you come to them with a concern or a complaint or an issue that you want to discuss or work through or address, and they shut you down or shut you out or label you as being too sensitive, it is because they don't know what to do with those big feelings that are coming up inside of them when they think that they have hurt or upset or disappointed you in some way. And so because they don't know what to do with their own difficult emotions, they will deflect on to you and shut you down or shut you out. So knowing that when someone does that, it's not likely that it's because you are too sensitive. It is because they are. And they don't know what to do about it. And now I've saved the best for last. Well, best might be a bit of a stretch of the word, but this one is probably the most important one because it's one that we have all said or we have at least all thought. And this one is, "You make me so angry," or even, "You make me feel whatever it is." Taking this emotional maturity work to the next level means that we truly understand that other people are not solely responsible for our feelings. What is responsible for our own feelings, the majority of the time, is simply our own thoughts. What we are thinking about or making it mean when someone does or says something. Our interpretation of it, our thoughts about it, our perspective on what they are saying or doing is what is causing the majority of our emotional reaction to it. Not to say that we aren't going to be impacted by the words or actions of other people, but we can learn so much about how to manage our reactions to it when we learn how to manage our minds, manage our thoughts, manage what we are making it mean, whatever it is that they are saying or doing. This is the deeper work that we do in the Shift Society. You can get more information and on the wait list for that through the link in the description. And while you wait for registration to open, get my free 10-minute guided mindfulness exercise. This one is going to help you start to observe what you are thinking and not get so caught up in whatever it is that you are thinking about what is happening either inside or around you. Mindfulness is a really powerful part of building emotional maturity, and you can get that free download in the description below. Now let me know, which one of these connected with you? Are you here to be able to identify these things in others, or are you here to learn how to identify them in yourself so you know what you want to be working on? No judgment. No shame. It is just about being honest and authentic. And that, in and of itself, is a sign of your emotional maturity. Get that free download, 10-minute guided mindfulness exercise. Let me know what connected with you in the description below or in the comment section below. And as always, it is wonderful to have you here. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of those around you. Bye for now.